So this is Marty Wilson. I'm sitting here with William M. Buzzard, of Delaware Water Gap. We're in the Monroe County Historical Association. And Tanya's sitting here recording, and I expect Amy to sit in with us when she's free. It's October 28th, and we're here to talk with Bill about his life in Monroe County. So Bill, let's start with this. Where and when were you born, and who were your parents?
Well, it was Rosencrantz Hospital at that time, which is in East Stroudsburg, and my parents were Harry and I'm scared here. Mary and Harry Buzzard.
And your grandparents are from the area as well, right?
Right, that's Russell Buzzard and Pearl Buzzard Schellenberger.
Now, I happen to know this, but you're from Delaware Water Gap. You may have been born in East Stroudsburg, but you went right back to Delaware Water Gap.
Exactly.
Right? And you were third generation of Water Gapians.
Right.
Where'd you live then, or what are your first memories?
Well, I lived in the Hillcrest Apartments, were my first memory, and that was down on Waring, I believe it is, street at this point, and it was torn down for the Interstate 80 and the bridge associated with that. So that's where my first residence, and then my father, with the help of his brother, built a house on Shepherd Avenue, which I now live in.
So the Hillcrest was down near the festival site, or it was down towards the current bridge over Route 80?
It's the current bridge over Route 80. It's when the Water Gap Road stops. That is about where the Hillcrest Apartments were. They came up from the railroad station and then up into town, but the Hillcrest Apartment was right there.
What'd your dad do for a living?
He was, well, at first, I don't remember it, but he said he worked with the railroad. What he did with the railroad, I don't know. And then he got a job as a draftsman with Patterson Kelly, where he worked the rest of his life.
And your grandfather? What did he do in the Gap?
My grandfather, well, I'm presently trying to look some of this up, but he came out of the Bangor area, and so far as I can determine, he came over with a bunch of immigrants. His family came over with immigrants, had like 5 brothers or something, and they were miners in England or some area in southern England. So then he got a job as a floor molder at what was Marsh's foundry over here just out the road a bit, and that's where he worked most of his life. Did
you have brothers, sisters?
I have a brother who is in a group home just down the street here.
Older than you or younger?
Younger, yeah.
So the Hillcrest Apartments, you start school, I assume, in Delaware Water Gap? At
the 3-room schoolhouse, yes.
Oh yeah? What do you remember about that building?
It had 3 rooms. and that the first and second grade were on the ground floor, and then the 3rd grade was upstairs to the sort of the, I guess you'd say, east side of the building, which is in 2 halves. So at that time, the bridge was being built, and we had quite a few students in there because of the families of the people working on the bridge.
So we're talking the late 50s, early 60s?
Late 50s. maybe even mid-50s, yeah. Because the house that on Shepherd Avenue was finished, it was like 1952. So that was taken down, but a lot of the other buildings were taken down around the same time.
What other buildings were down there next to it or near it?
Well, the Castle Inn, and that survived, but there was a whole group of hotels, and I can't tell you the names.
Well, do you remember anything about the Castle Inn's swimming pool or the tennis courts or any of that stuff?
Yeah, because at the Hillcrest we lived right across the street from the tennis courts, and it had a very large pool, and I remember it being very large, but of course I was very young, so we had that too. Had an ice cream parlor there, and the Warings later in the life of the building, Warings had bought it, and he had the Pennsylvanians there for their practice, I guess, their summer practice. He would have them, and so I remember going to some of those practice sessions.
Did you sing with them, or?
Pardon?
Did you sing with them?
No. Yeah, but so it was a bustling place back then, as best I remember.
So the road's coming through. They build the bridge and they're building the road. Was the Castle Inn working was it a hotel at that point, or had it shut down as a hotel?
It was, I think, in its death throes, if you will, as a going concern.
Did you ever go into the hotel when it was operating as a hotel?
Yeah, very vague memories of it there. Yes.
All right. So you went to the school there. Till what grade?
It was 5th grade, and we went over to the Ramsey School in 6th grade.
And then eventually graduated from Stroudsburg High School.
Right, out the street. Yeah.
And then where'd you go to college?
I went down to Penn State University at that time, had a night school type thing. So I went to there until I would have had to go out to Penn State, out to State College, and I had a job and couldn't afford it, so I didn't go. But
where'd you meet Jeanette? At college or in Water Gap? Or?
Kathy Mikesell. Don't know whether you recall that, but Kathy Mikesell was a resident of Water Gap. Her father, Mikesell, was a mayor for quite a long time. She went to school with me. She introduced me to Jeanette, who was in training down at St. Luke's in Bethlehem. Rest is history.
So you came back from college. You had this job. Where was it, did you say?
Well, at the time there was a fellow named Bob Smith in Water Gap, and he there was a company out on West Main Street called Oil Jack Manufacturing, and so Bob, who was a resident of Water Gap and whose mother lived next door to me, called me up and said, "I have a job for you." And I said, "Well, I don't know, and maybe I could do this." And he said, "I have a job for you. You just come out and start on Monday. I'll tell you what to do."
Okay.
So he got me started there. The pay at one point wasn't sufficient, so I ended up going down to what was then the Ronson Corporation in Delaware Water Gap. So I ended up living in Water Gap and working in Water Gap, and had a 1966 GTO convertible. So if that dates that.
So you were at Ronson until it closed?
No, I was at Ronson until the pay wasn't sufficient, and I went back to Oil Jack, which was Banner Metals, and had a good time there.
And you worked at Banner Metal until they went under, is that correct?
I was one of 2 people that were left when they finally closed the doors in bankruptcy.
No kidding.
Yeah.
What did you do, and what did the other person do?
Well, the other person was Lucille Lazoyne, who lives over east in Cherry Valley, and was a secretary that came to work at Banner just out of high school, and she was had a good grasp on all the documentation. So that's why she stayed, and because we were both working for the bank, and I stayed because I had skills in the area of manufacturing that were.
So what did you do after Banner finally closed its doors?
What did I do after that? Yeah. Well, at that time, I ended up to be a vice president at Banner Metals, and I had a number of customers that were important to them. So I stayed there, and at the end, I started my own company with those people who I had served when I was an employee at Banner, and so I basically took the customers with me and had my own business for 25 years.
You just shut it down recently.
I'm in the process of retiring and shutting it down. I now say it's, people say when and what, I say it's a process. So I'm getting there, but it was very profitable, and I did work for furniture companies down in Quakertown. It's a $1 billion company. I did work for the Federal Reserve. I did all their money transfer equipment and other things.
Did you say your business was $1 billion company? Is that what you said?
I did business with $1 billion company.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I know that you've been very involved in the community and in public service. How did that come about?
The short answer is a Water Gap resident by the name of John Wilson was driving by the house that I had recently bought then, and gave me an offer I couldn't refuse because, as you know, John was very persuasive in getting what he wanted done, and so he prevailed, and I ended up joining the council at that time.
So how did it? You weren't elected. Was there an opening? Had somebody resigned, or did you run?
No, I don't think I ran for the first one. I really don't recall. I think I was appointed, and John had a way of doing those things. So, for all I know, he just wrote my name in a book and this carried on with life.
This was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Give or take a month or so, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you have a unique perspective of Water Gap's history over the last 50, 60, 70 years, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen the town changed over those years?
Well, I guess it starts with being at the Hillcrest Apartments that were right across from the Hillcrest, and that was sort of the bustling center of Water Gap, which I have the faint memories of, and it goes all the way to today with the council, and I do enjoy the council, have enjoyed the council, and continue to enjoy it because it's nice to work with the people and to try and shape the future of the town in a good way. What
would have been some of the biggest council issues that you've dealt with personally? Mm-hmm. Were you part of the water system, or was that was installed way before you?
Yeah, small group. We're sort of involved with all of it. Well, I guess I tell the story when I first came on council, at John's behest, Water Gap, the town of Water Gap, the borough, was building a new road, Kimberly Road, and they had decided there was one or two houses down there, and they decided to serve them, so they had to create a road to do it, build a road. And I remember standing, the first time I saw it, I was standing at the top of the road, and with John and someone else, and as you looked down, we saw a bulldozer that was stuck, a very large bulldozer, stuck in what would be the middle of the road. And it's hard to get big bulldozers stuck. And found out later they had decided to build a road, but there was a spring there, and it just became a huge problem. And we worked and eventually got the bulldozer unstuck and paved it and so on and so forth. It turned out that the people that were doing some of the contracting work weren't paid for like 18 months before that. So this John had decided that I ought to take over the financial aspect of councilman, and so that was sort of dumped on me, and not in a bad way, but we did it, and I ended up in finance after that for many years, the most part of 50 years.
So building Kimberly Road, now I don't know if I remember this or not, but you would go up Shepherd Avenue past where Derek and Edie lived and down towards where Jeff lives, and it sort of ended right there, right, the road? Right,
it took several stages. One, it had to get cut in there where you suggest, down to the middle, and then it remained there, and then it got cut to go down into Cherry Valley.
But then coming up from Cherry Valley, how far did it come up before it was?
It didn't come up.
Oh, it didn't come up at all?
It had to go from Cherry Valley up to the corner, and then from the corner up. We did that, and it was a pretty active time. And then one of the other things is that Water Gap, progressing over time, Water Gap did not have a sewer system. So everybody had a cesspool, which is just a group of concrete blocks with a top on it, and very unsanitary. And so Uncle Sam, over the years, had decided that everybody in the country ought to have it, and they were able to manipulate the circumstances of which they funded to get people to accept the fact that they were going to have a central sewer systems in the country. And so they came to Water Gap and said it was Act 201 or something, and we had to implement a central sewer system within a certain amount of time. And at that time, I was president, and meetings went on and so on and so forth, and finally it came down to that we were in violation. And so one of the people from the DEP, I think it was, came to the meetings and said, you have to do this, and I have to be president. And I had thought up a strategy to save us from being fined and so on and so forth. And I think it was the truth, but the truth had to come out in a way that it was understandable for everybody involved. And so what I said at the meeting, I said, look, you know, it was one of two times I sort of did this. At that time, they had come up to 50% payments. Uncle Sam would put in 50%, and the communities would have to put in 50% to enact and construct the sewer system. And he came up, he had his pitch, and you have to do it. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but we can't do it. I said, well, you have to. And I said, well, no, we can't. And he said, well, there absolutely is no question here. You are going to install it. And I told him, well, there also is no question that the people can't afford it. So at that time, the 50% would have meant a certain amount of money. And I said, just can't happen. So you can do anything you want. You can put me in jail. You can put the other 6 members of the con in jail. I don't think you're going to do that. But there's nothing you can do to make us vote and approve and contract something we can't pay for. And so it went on and on and on. And finally, through 25% in negotiation and just total stubbornness to say, look, we all know the facts here, and the facts will not support, the council can't sign anything that will support fees such as required. And anyhow, we eventually got that down to 15%. And at 15%, they were always above board on the law and everything. And they told me, they said, look, here it is, we're giving you 15%. That's the most we have given anybody else. And the law that allows us to compensate for in this case, 85% more, it will cease at the end of the year. And so we said, okay, sign on the line. That was a big deal because of the amount of money involved. And at that time, I remember being over by the Deer Head in the hill there, and the sewer at that time was, for many of the hotels, it would start at the beginning of Mountain Road up where it joins Mountain Road and whatever, Mincy. From there down, the sewer would go into a culvert, which was, for the most part, just a cement chute, if you will, that comes down, and then some of the bigger ones would turn, but it would be down by the Castle Inn. It would turn and it would go down under the sidewalk. So what they had done is construct a pipe, if you will. It wasn't a round pipe, it was just a square pipe, and the top of that pipe was the sidewalk. So the sewer would come down, go down under there, go down past the hill crest, go down to, I'm trying to think of the name of the hotel, to another hotel, and go under the hotel in an open sewer and go into the creek. And so this was the status of the sewer around town, and many of the houses, they would have, their sewer system had been there for I don't know how long. It would leak, it would run all over the ground. It was a mess. And Uncle Sam, wanted to do the right thing, and we did want to do the right thing too. So we managed to do it. But along the way, they called me one day that I should come to the Mountain Manor, what's called the Deer Head, come down there because there was a problem with a fellow with the DEP, and he had a badge. And so when I got there, the fellow with the badge was there, and there was also a backhoe from Water Gap that had dug up the pipe coming down Mountain Road. And so I walked over and I looked down, and yep, there was sewer coming down the pipe, and the fellow with the badge came over and turned out he was DEP. And he said, you have to fix this. remember I was pretty young at that time, and I said, no, I don't have to fix this. I said, because, you know, all the people that live on this road that use this, we think it's their problem, not the Water Gap problem. They own it, they own the sewer, they own it, and more because they use it, and they own it financially if they have to fix it. And he said, no, he said, you all are the people that are responsible, and you all are the people going to fix it. And I said, no, you know, we discussed this at a meeting last night, and we've all voted that no, it isn't our sewer line to fix it, so the other people, and we won't do it. He says, I tell you, you will. He says, I will be back tomorrow morning with a court order. And so he obviously went up to Scranton, went into federal court, got it, and come back next day. It wasn't even 24 hours before. And I reported at the next meeting, game over.
So this raises a number of questions. It must have reeked in the summertime. Did it reek in the summertime?
Well, yeah, if you didn't get it, you had to make sure you didn't get too close to it. But, you know, it for the most part was, it reeked.
Yeah. Well, I've heard about this before from Jack Mulehand. He told me about this the first time I heard about it. But is it not true also that, what is that, Oak Street, and maybe in other places, well, along Cherry Valley Creek, that people were just dumping it straight into the creek or into the river?
Yeah, if you were on the bottom of that, you know, bottom of define bottom, the bottom of Cherry Creek towards Cherry Creek. If you were between the road and Cherry Creek, yes, it ran down. Other people, like my grandfather, was on the road. He had one. It was off to the side of his house, and it was in a block cesspool, 5 6 feet wide, 5 6 feet high, round, and it would overflow, and he ended up with a little ditch that came down to Cherry Valley, which then went through the water system, which went into the creek.
We should mention this is the 1980s, right? This was the 1980s.
Oh yeah. We were one of the last to, yeah. Uncle Sam, I just forget which one, had already, you know, put their strong arm on Stroudsburg and East Stroudsburg, but the little ones, we ended up to be the last to be pushed into this, because many of the little communities just didn't have the money, and they had to, ended up, it was defined the right amount of money that they would have to put up for someone to have to be able to construct this in a way that was economical enough to have the people in that town pay for it. I mean, and I just took the position, you can't, if we can't pay for it, we can't do it. You can arrest us, you can do anything you want, but that won't make it. And we came up with, you know, the average person here in town makes so much a year and so on and so forth, and therefore, you know, you can only expect this. And after a while, you know, the bureaucracy will eventually get you on anything if you wait long enough.
So when that DEP officer said, fix this, what did he mean exactly? I mean, was he telling you have to put in a sewer system now?
Basically, yes. Okay. And he didn't care. He did his job. You will fix it. He didn't have to stand there and engineer, let's see, the pipe has to go so far, or the pipe has to take 20 people, or this may be rock and we got to do it. He just said he did his job. You will do it. Right here it is. And it's signed by a federal judge up in Scranton. But having said that, you know, I don't know, but I would suggest that somewhere there was a meeting where he said, look, I wrote them up, they have to do it. And the guy across the table says, yeah, okay, you know, we're going to have to up their funding. But the important thing was just to stand there and say what was just the absolute simple truth. The borough couldn't do what he wanted at the level of funding that they were prepared to give. So they had to get backed up, and I was pretty good at that time. I did a little research and found out, and I made it simple. We can't do it. You throw us in jail, but you can't do it. And that worked at one other point during that time, and that was when we had the Tox Island Dam, and you're familiar with all that, and it was the Corps of Engineers who began that project. The Corps of Engineers mapped it, engineered it. Corps of Engineers took care of the condemning of many properties up along the river up towards Port Jervis. And at that time, they were coming down, and it got to us. I guess in many cases, we were sort of last in many of these areas. They came and they wanted the water gap. They were going to take the 600 to 800 acres we own. The borough of Delaware Water Gap owns about 800 acres up on the mountain behind the town. And the Corps of Engineers was looking to purchase or condemn or somehow get various areas that fall within their mapping of what they wanted to have, what property they wanted to have for the, at that time, reservoir. And so they came to the meeting, and over time, they said, "We want your property."
You're talking about the watershed.
The watershed. And it was the consensus of the council at that time, and again, I think I was still president. It was consensus that we didn't want to give it to them. And, you know, it further came to the point where you had to decide, and I pushed an area because I knew it would be necessary down, make a decision. Either you want to sell it to them or you don't. But if you don't want to sell it, then you have to take the position you don't want to sell it at any price. And so over time, that question was distilled back and forth, and it's sort of, although no one stood up and said it, we don't want to sell it at any price. So again, this is the Corps of Engineers, and they would come to the meetings and so on and so forth. And so over time, I got it to the point where they insisted on making an offer, and I think the offer was $100,000 for that property.
Now, at the time, just to clarify, because I think I know this, but maybe other people don't. That was the source of Water Gap's drinking water.
Exactly. So what happened over that area up there on top of the mountain, it came down to a little head wall that was in the creek that had a pipe that goes down to the Lake Lenape. It had a pipe that goes down to the golf course, and it also had a pipe that goes into a reservoir that we had, which was, let's say, a large swimming pool. Yeah. And water goes in there before it was piped from various places in town. The reason it goes in a reservoir is because by then everybody knew that water had to be chlorinized. So they would put chlorine into that big pool on a daily basis. They'd fill 5-gallon buckets with chlorine and just pour it in. Very, very bad. And so, but anyhow, that was the situation, and we were using surface water And again, Uncle Sam is in the act saying, we don't want surface water anymore. And I have to admit, in most of the cases, they really did have the proper motivation and engineering behind getting this stuff fixed. You don't want it, you have to have wells and so on and so forth. And Water Gap did try a well along that thing, and it didn't work out, so that just sort of cemented the position that they didn't want it. So anyhow, getting back to that, they decided, okay, they were going to come to a meeting and so on and so forth. And I had set up the argument, look, okay, and they were saying, look, we can condemn this land, and you that's it. Just, we will condemn it unless you agree to sell it. And eventually I got to the point, and I was able to say, okay, you're going to condemn it, but if you condemn it, then how are you going to ensure that Water Gap has the water? Well, that's no problem. We'll do this and that. Well, I said it is a problem, because if you take that, then you also have to take the responsibility of having a uninterruptible, healthy source of water for the town for the next 100 years. You can't. Yes, you have the power to condemn it, but this is our water source, and we're going to need it for 100 years, and it's going to be your responsibility, because that's what we're going to say in court. You know, it's not just the land, it is the water source. And so that went back and forth a few times, and then they said, well, you know, we can put fences up there, and we can put personnel up there to keep people out of there. They'll have to stay out of your watershed. I said, and that would be your responsibility for 100 years, because it isn't ours to have a police force up there to defend that. And so he finally came down to one night. He was there, and they were there, and the press was there, and we went back and forth. They presented, and I, as president, was making the noise back and forth. And finally I said, with the press there and everything, I said, I have to make it absolutely clear. You are not going to have this property until you put 7 men in brown uniforms and sit them where the council presently sits. And with that, they stormed out, and then the fellow from the Corps of Engineers, who had been leading this battle, resigned, because they didn't want to see, his bosses didn't want to see that kind of thing, because obviously I was referring to Nazi Germany, where you would put somebody in charge of a city or whatever, and that was it. So that was fun. So
the bottom line there is that they did not get the land. That continued to be the watershed for Water Gap.
Right.
But then it's no longer the watershed for Water Gap. What happened there?
Well, as I said before, Uncle Sam is right on some of the things they do. And surface water isn't good because it can be contaminated very easily by any Tom, Dick, and Harry. Yeah. And it just isn't the thing to do. You know, you need to go into a well, so you're getting, I don't want to say pure, but a pretty good water stock that you can improve with mechanization and so on and so forth. So we eventually moved to wells, and we had some good ones and we had some bad ones. And you know, for Water Gap, it spend tens of thousands of dollars to drill a well and have a well that doesn't work, but that's how the game of wells work, I guess. Yeah. So yeah, we ended up with good wells and pumping stations and so on and so forth.
And when you say Water Gap moved to wells, were they pushed or they voluntarily moved to wells?
We were gently pushed. They had the law on their side. But what they did, somebody has to say it more elegantly than I can, but when they control the purse strings, I guess they like to call it, look, you know, we can help you out in this well or in these things, or we don't have to. So you guys do whatever you want. But as they now did, because it further along, Water Gap for up until about 7-8 years ago had a water system, but we didn't have any wells to charge people based on their use of the water. So over time, we got to the point where we installed, had an ordinance, and then as a result got a grant to put in meters. So we put in the meters. We wouldn't have put in the meters if we didn't have a grant. But then over time, that meter became obsolete, and now we just put in another set of meters over the entire town, and we got every nickel of it from Uncle Sam. But it goes both ways. So Water Gap never paid the Delaware River Basin Commission. We never paid any amount of money to anybody. We just did our own thing. We had a well. But after we put the new meters in the new collection system, and Uncle Sam paid the bill, we started getting invoices for water drawn from the Delaware Basin thing, because they have a tax. I'll call it a tax, it's a fee. A tax for every gallon of water that is withdrawn from the Delaware Basin to be used by various places. And it goes up every couple of years.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I don't think most people know that in Water Gap.
No, probably don't. Yeah. So we did that. Those are a couple things we did in Water Gap that were significant, because there you go, there was the water. And when you do a project like the water, it has to be funded, and it's generally funded by something out of Wall Street, okay? But they're basically community bonds. And so the law required that the borough council, it required that they had to construct it. They had to fund it and construct it, the borough. And after that, and those bond, and the reason that was the authority didn't do it. The reason why they did is because by having Water Gap, the town, funded, they are obligated to pay the bonds. So, $1 million bond, Water Gap as a community has to do it. But once it's up and running and the bonds are all settled and whatever, then it had been better to move it over and have a authority separate to run it. So that's how this authority got into business. But water is a big deal. Sewer is a big deal for a little town, and it does. After a while, it gets lost that the place didn't have a sewer, the place didn't have a good water supply there.
I can't imagine, if those things hadn't been rectified, I can't imagine what it would be like in Water Gap. I mean, property values would have fallen through the floor. Nobody would want to live there.
Oh, absolutely. But that basically was we were on the back end of it, the Clean Water Act and so on and so forth. We were way down here because we're so small. And but I try and take the tack that because we're so small is the reason we need more grants to do various things. So
So those are some big things. Were there other big things like that you were involved in?
That's a good question. I can't think of, but I know there are, but I just can't think of them.
How about this? There was a time in Water Gap when there was a slew of arsons.
Ah, yeah.
What do you remember about that?
I'd have to refresh my memory to have detail, but basically there were buildings were catching fire in Water Gap, and even a layman could look at it and say somebody lit this. For instance, one, I think it was over on Mountain Road, where it, what was the name of the
Mountain House?
The Mountain House. The Mountain House. How
Frank Brown owned it, right?
Right, the Mountain House. And there was evidence that somebody tried, and I guess did, start a fire under the porch on it. So there were a number of places in Water Gap, well, a couple places in Water Gap maybe. I don't know whether it was ever proven that it was that, but elsewhere in the county were other people where an arsonist was setting fires, and it turned to, as I recall, an individual of Indian descent. Native Indian descent, American. And so I lost track. I don't think they were apprehended or anything in Water Gap, but everybody in Water Gap was, many people in Water Gap went out and bought a gun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was two things: install sensor lights or install outside lights and buy a gun.
The music hall at the Castle Inn burned down.
Yeah, was that one of them? Yeah, I think you're right.
The Mountain House, Stevens' house over near where Joan Paulus lives. I don't know if that was one of that caused by the same guy, but that house burned down.
Yeah, there were
a number
quite a few, and there's one, and I don't recall the name of it. It's on 611, and it's just it's 611 and Mountain Road, just down a little bit, because I was a volunteer fireman, and there was a fellow that died there, and I picked up one end of him, so I know that one. Yeah.
Well, lots happened in Water Gap, and you've been central to a lot of it. What do you think, looking back, what's the thing you're proudest about?
Having a group of people that came together and solved problems. You had to have that. And your friend John Wilson was part of it, and Paulus, just there's so many people that were there, and people that, because of the nature of building this massive construction project, Interstate 80, there were a lot of people there that disappeared, but they were there while things were going. But so it's having the people and the varying expertise coming together to solve problems in a little town that would not survive if it wasn't for volunteers. Because when you think about it, just go sit in a stump or out in the woods for a little bit and think about it, and the community of 700 people, let's say, can't pay that many people, so you need volunteers to do it. So you need people in not only in the council and whatever, but volunteers that have kept the community together when other communities around of our size just sort of disappear.
I think we should point out, I don't know if other people know this, but there are, 4 municipalities in Monroe County: Stroudsburg, East Stroudsburg, Delaware Water Gap, and Mount Pocono, right? Right. And Water Gap's the only one in which the council people receive no compensation.
Oh, really? Yeah. I don't know that.
Yeah.
But we've always had it, and over time, everybody sort of runs for office because they have an axe to grind. But given a year or two, that disappears, and they join everybody else trying to make it work. So that's my thing. It's to have seen that over all those years was good, and the community has done very well for me, and I just want to do a little well for it because.
Yeah, I know you're not going to mention this, but you were just honored with a park being dedicated in your name for 50 years of service on the council. And
it scared me to death.
Why did you say that?
No, it's not something that, I don't know how to handle that.
Yeah.
I can argue about a sewer system or a water system, but I don't know how to argue about that. Yeah.
Well, you've given us a lot of stuff, a lot of insights into Water Gap that I didn't know about. I think we're probably drawing toward an end here. Is there anything that we should have asked you about? Is there anything that in the life of William Buzzard and Delaware Water Gap that should be on the record?
I can't think of anything other than I'm, as I said before at that ceremony, I'm just proud to be a water gapper, if you want, and it has been a real, it's been good for me and good for many of the many other people who've taken an interest in the town. I think that's worked well.
That sounds like a good place to end this. Thanks very much, Bill.